All right, you've been warned. You're officially on camera. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mara.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our professional learning opportunity, climate change and student dialogue. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are happy to provide at least one virtual learning opportunity every academic year for our educators and partners in our network. Tonight we'll be focusing on element 4 of our learning framework here at Groundswell, which is research your issue. And if you want to learn more about our place-based stewardship education principles and different elements, you can visit our website. Before we get started on our formal programming today, we are an affiliation of Grand Valley State University here at Groundswell. And so every event that we have in Kent or Ottawa counties, which are the areas that we serve, we like to host or conduct a land acknowledgement in order to respect the place that we're in as part of our place-based stewardship education practice and acknowledge the history and culture of the space that we occupy. We would like to recognize the people of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples on whose land we are gathered here today. The Three Fires people are indigenous to this land, which means that this is their ancestral territory. Every university in this country was built on indigenous land. We conduct land acknowledgements as a reminder of the histories, teachings, traditions, and the first people who originated here and who tend to Mishkiki, land, earth, always. We conduct these acknowledgements to be good visitors, as these were always done before colonial contact. To continue to be good visitors, we have the responsibility to learn about the history of settler colonialism and its impact on Indigenous people. We urge you to join us in learning more about the 500 years of settler colonialism that has taken place in this country. Most of us have much to learn about the Indigenous people, their knowledge, and their ways of being, and to take action in our communities, more for Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. So before I hand it over to the Michigan Climate Action Network crew, I will go over just a brief agenda so you have a kind of an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. So first up, we'll hear from Denise Keel, who is the Executive Director of Michigan Climate Action Network. She'll be talking a little bit about public attitudes, climate change in the Michigan mind, and a couple other elements about the emotions that can come up when you're talking about climate change with your students. And then after that, she'll also be talking about line 5 through a climate justice lens. Erica Bolden, who some of you may know, I know she's been at several Groundswell PDs in the past, can no longer attend today. So Denise has kindly offered to cover for her and be talking about line 5. But I will be sharing Erica's contact info in our follow-up email. So if you would like to connect with her, which I know she's really, really looking forward to connecting with educators and fellow community partners down the road, you'll be able to do that. We'll be taking a short break around 5:20, time to process the content so far, write down questions, grab another drink or a snack, and then we'll come back together and hear from Elise DeCamp. And she'll be talking about climate change curriculum and best practices. So we're really excited to learn more about that. And then we'll be breaking out into a couple smaller groups to talk about the content again. Maybe you're going to have a discussion about how you're going to bring this to your grade level, or maybe you can ask a fellow community partner in the room about how you might be talking about climate change as an organization. And then we will end the evening by coming back together for a group discussion. Well, you'll be able to ask the MICAN staff some questions. Maybe we can have a group dialogue just about climate change in general. We're really looking forward to ending the night all together. A couple more things that I will talk about before I hand it over to MyCan. Of course, please keep yourself on mute during the presentation just to eliminate any background noise so that we can make this a really great and accessible learning space for everybody. As I previously mentioned, this is being recorded to be shared out. So if you don't want to be on camera at all, please feel free to keep your camera off. Please keep track of the questions that you would like to ask. And you can do that by throwing them in the chat, and then we can get to them during a couple of different Q&A times that we'll be having throughout the evening. But we're really looking forward to having a great dialogue throughout the evening. So instead of asking questions as they're presenting, just please hold those until Denise or Elise says it's time for questions. A note about taking care of yourself. We know that climate change can, again, bring up some hard emotions, some tough emotions. So as we're going over this content, if it's just feeling too heavy today, that is okay. You're welcome to just excuse yourself silently. You don't have to announce it or anything. And maybe you'll revisit the video recording at another time, just on a better day. So that being said, just please take care of yourself when it comes to climate change and the emotions that can come with it. And while climate change is inherently political, we kindly ask that this space does not become a political debate. We want this to be a great learning environment for everyone. So we ask that politics don't become a huge part of the conversation. And then, of course, thank you for your grace when it comes to this virtual platform of the screen sharing on and off. So just thank you so much for any little technical bumps that we may run into. And I know that this place-based stewardship education, as Mara mentioned, might be a new concept for some of you. So I wanted to quick share this definition of place-based stewardship education. And if Groundswell is new to you, I know we have some folks from around the state today, which is really, really wonderful. If you're interested in learning more about Groundswell and what we do or place-based stewardship education, I would be more than happy to connect with you following this presentation, and we can set up a time where I can tell you more about those things. But I certainly don't want to take up any more time from our lovely hosts. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michigan Climate Action Network, and we're just looking forward to hearing from them. So don't mind me as I stop sharing my screen.
So wonderful to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you for taking the time out of your days to do this, right? We all know what it's like to come home and feel like it's time for rest and repair, and that you still joined us here on the screen today means just a ton to all of us. So really appreciate that. And my second thank you is, and maybe sorry, is that instead of Erica, you're gonna have to listen to me for longer. So I apologize in advance for that, and I will do my best to channel today. Allison did a great job setting us up. That is still our outline, but I will get to be Erica for a little bit, and we'll talk through overall attitudes, climate justice with an emphasis on nature-based solutions, and line 5. I really want to try to show you a video around that, and then Elise is going to round it up with some classroom resources. So we've just so enjoyed this partnership. Thank you, Allison and Mara and everyone at Groundswell for welcoming us, for being part of some other events all this whole last year, and we're finally here doing it. So one of the things that I really talk about are some of the public attitudes. And I bet most of you are familiar with the Yale School on Climate Change Communications in partnership with George Mason University. And they've been polling Americans around climate change issues since 2013. And what I'm showing you is instead of that bipartisan, polarization, what they've been really working on to get away from that is showing that there are 6 different global warming Americas. And when we really ask people what they're thinking and feeling about climate change, it turns out about 70% of us are in the alarmed or concerned, meaning you know what's going on, you're concerned, and you're motivated. And really only about 9% are in that dismissive category of what we might even think of as climate change deniers. And the thing to note about this, these are the 2024 numbers. And since we've been doing these surveys for over 10 years, the alarmed and concerned has like quadrupled in size. It is now a 5-to-1 ratio of folks who know that climate change is happening and concerned about it versus folks who are still in some sort of dismissive or doubtful category. And what's even more interesting to me over here is this 9% dismissive. That number hasn't really changed all that much over the years. It's been as low as 7 and as high as 10. And that, I think, tells us a really important fact about how we go about our work and our approach here at MICAN. And that's that sentence at the bottom. My career started with how are we going to get deniers and convince folks who don't know what's going on to be in this movement? Well, why would I continue talking to the 10% of folks who are probably never going to change their mind when I could instead work on the 70% or more of all of you that are concerned and want something to do. And that was a real shift in my thinking and in how we approach things at MICAN. And that's a failure, right? That we can remedy through education, through civic engagement, and through those pieces. And so my main message to you is to remember that you are the majority, the vast majority out there. When we look at what's going on out there, well, it doesn't seem that way. And one of the things about why that is, up here at the top again, is over time, those 6 categories of global warming. And what Yale then asked was, well, how many of these alarmed people are actually taking some sort of group action or are writing legislators or are doing something in their community to work on resilience hubs? And it turns out very few of us are doing those actions, right? We care, we're concerned, but only about 2% of us are exhibiting some high level of action. Now, I know you're all in that 2% group, so don't worry. We're going to get there. But there's some reasons why it doesn't still feel that way. And that's really why MyCam exists. We also know that only about a third of the American public and Michiganders are talking about climate on a regular basis, right? Do you hear about it in the media? Do you discuss it once a week? That's like a third of us. And then there was a study done by Nature Communications, and I absolutely love this study, and it takes me just a minute to explain it so we all understand what's going on. What they did was say, hey, it seems like 70% of the population, according to everybody, knows that climate change is happening, is concerned. How come it doesn't feel that way when we're out there? And they asked Americans and Michiganders specifically to say, how many people do you think also support climate action or are worried about this? And it turns out when we ask folks about that, they really only think like 10% of the rest of the population is with them. So we perceive the opposite of the true social reality. This is called pluralistic ignorance in social science. But the easy way to say it is we got to support each other, folks. The fact that we are not talking about this as a majority that we are leads to a false perception that you're in the minority when you really are not. Now, couple that with mis and disinformation campaigns meant to make you feel that way and the sort of zeitgeist around this. Our whole mission is built on those factors. And what we try to do is exactly this, right? We exist in order to amplify those stories and voices, to make it known that there is the public support for climate action and for strong climate action, and to showcase and demonstrate that. We try to connect all of you, right? So that you can meet each other and learn from each other in environments like this, to talk about it and take that message and support you in this work, because we know that it isn't something that folks feel comfortable talking about all the time, but they absolutely should. And it's our job to help you with that messaging and how to do that, not just in your classrooms, but I hope in your communities and beyond. Our vision is really fairly simple, thinking about equitable action and the justice-centered approach. We want to make sure that your zip code doesn't predict your climate impacts. We want to achieve those overall declines. And we're really a lot about the cultural and social norms, right? How do we get folks to change and make this transition? We lead by example and we show the way. And our role is, again, making this huge network of folks. Well, what about teachers, right? We're talking about education. Guess what? You're also the majority in the teaching in the classroom. This was a survey done a year or so ago by the North American Association for Environmental Education. And they first asked both administrators and teachers, do you think, from administrators, are you actually like, do you want to teach climate change, or do you think your teachers should teach climate? 74% of administrators said yeah, and 80% of, or sorry, I got my blues and golds backwards. 80% of administrators, just FYI, think you should or already are teaching climate, right? A lot of times we think that's the gap. 74% of teachers think that they should be teaching climate. What does the public think? We can drill down from the Yale surveys into county and regional districts, and you can look all this up in your classrooms. When we look at just Michigan, the support for teaching climate, 77% of Michiganders want you to be teaching climate. in your classrooms. And this red is good in public polls. So it's so interesting when I do climate change talks because red is usually bad, meaning temperature and it's getting hotter. And those are in our world of polling, red is good, right? All of these counties, that's the average, but we can see how that plays out across the state. Of course, it's a little bit different in some communities, but there's a huge amount of support for should we teach climate, and everybody thinks we should be. Are we actually teaching climate was then the next thing that NAAE asked. Only 39% of teachers say they are teaching any form of climate change in their classrooms. Now that's again, 70% of us say we should, only 30% of us are. Why is that? Only 21% of those folks felt very informed, right? This isn't something I know enough about in order to teach. And that's part of why we're here and part of all the resources that Groundswell can offer you. What was so interesting to me is this bottom graphic. It's the same exact pluralistic ignorance that is happening at the larger public scale is happening among teachers and administrators. So teachers really thought that their administrators and that parents do not want them to be teaching climate change. But it turns out just the opposite is actually true. Parents and administrators do want you to be teaching those things. And so instead of the attitude behavior gap that we call it in social science, we've been calling this the confidence gap, right? What is it for teachers and for all of you? What are the supports that you actually need? I've been working with the Michigan Alliance for Environmental and Outdoor Education. I'll talk about the group that we formed to do exactly that in just a minute. But we wanted to follow up on the survey that NAAE did, and just last year put out our own survey of Mayo members and our members that are teachers and said, are you guys, do you want to teach climate? 84% of you said yes. How many of us are actually including climate? None at 26%, infrequent, 19% sporadic. We got a lot of work here to do, right? To bridge this confidence and attitude gap and get you all the resources and support that you need. And again, that's why we wanted to be here tonight. This is a great tool when you think about the 6 global warming Americas. This is it is a survey that you can actually add to Yale's data while you're doing this. I highly recommend this, right? The first rule of communications is to know your audience. And you can have your class take this, right? And see where they fall along those 6 global warming Americas. You could ask your administrators, you could ask them to take it home, right? And see what the mix actually is. Because if we drill down, there are communications and other guidelines for each one of those 6 categories. Like, what do I do? What's the best way for me to approach messaging with those different groups, which is invaluable. And you're also adding to survey data, which is kind of cool. You can upload your class and track those results over time and how your class compares to averages. And the other thing, when you saw the red is good map that you can do, is you can drill down this public opinion by county, by congressional district. So we could look at just Michigan. We could look at just your county where your school is. We could look at the congressional district of your school and compare those. Again, really knowing that sense of where folks are on a variety of different policies and attitudes on climate, I think helps us distill that fear that we are alone and that we're going into something that is really contentious when it actually usually is not. I want to talk a little bit about students and the emotional piece before we switch over here. A lot of these, there's been a lot of great research in recent years. We don't know a lot is where I will start with what we know about the impacts of teaching climate on youth or their emotions in this space. This was the biggest study that we really have found and look at is US Ed Weekly, 14 to 18-year-olds from 2022. What do they think about when I'm learning about or reading about climate change? And I bet you're not surprised, right? Anxious, afraid, helpless, overwhelmed. There's a few optimistic, 17%, motivated, 24%. The first thing to say about this is I think this is an entirely rational response to climate change and what we know about it, right? And that's where the American Psychological Association has gotten involved and what their approach is. Colorado did a quick study of younger children, 10 to 11, very similar results. The other biggest study we have is of Australian children, 600 Australian children from 10 to 14, so just a little bit younger, worried about climate change, worried that the world is going to end, right, before they get a chance to live in it. So you are dealing, right? This is a huge piece that we're dealing with of those emotions that are going to come up. When we ask teachers the same thing, well, how is that feeling in your classroom? So please just give yourselves the grace and break. You're probably feeling the same things too, right? And that's okay to come from that space. You're feeling motivation and compassion right along with anxious and sadness. And I know folks are saying we're not always comfortable helping kids with those climate worries or addressing that topic, that you need more support for climate change, and that our own anxiety is often the reason why we shy away from teaching it, feeling uncertain and overwhelmed. This, again, to me, is just like what I hear out there in the general public of folks who care and are concerned about climate change. And we're trying to get them in the network, and they don't want to go to public meetings or write letters to the editor or call their friends because they feel uncertain and overwhelmed. We believe action is the antidote to that here at MICAN, and finding the other folks who want to do that work with you makes all the difference. Some best practices around this, the climate change, its education at its core is still critical, right? Knowing what is going on in our universe is massively important. Emotions matter, of course, and we have to take them seriously. We can try to cultivate realistic hope, right? And connecting students with nature is why we're so happy to be here with the place-based pieces. You know, the out of sight, out of mind, or the idea that, well, those impacts aren't really happening right now, or they're not happening to me, or how we recover them. That's one of the biggest reasons that we get overwhelmed and anxious, right? That we don't see it here and we don't see what we can do. Showing that and showing those pieces are really important. There's a lot of folks studying mindfulness, self-regulation, like how to deal with just our emotions in general, right? There's a whole social emotional learning piece that education at the lower levels could probably add a lot in, and there's a lot of debate around how that works still. Here at MICAN, one of the ways that we have really leaned into the idea, I was a university professor before I took on MICAN, and so I did the science and policy for nearly 20 years. And I really think one of the big things that is missing in the movement and in our concept of this issue is emotions and art and poetry and music and the humanities. So if there are any good English or social science teachers out there, my heart is with you, because this is really in so many ways where the education and movement needs to go. And one of the things that we're doing in partnership with the American Psychological Alliance is to offer climate cafes. These are not, I'm not a psychologist. We get folks together and they can just talk about their feelings, right? It's not, here's what you got to do to feel better. To hold those kinds of spaces and to give folks voice through art and music. We've done a couple different art builds at our annual climate summit. This is an example of one where it was roots of the trees and folks got to write answers to different questions right on a giant banner. What are they going to love about that climate future when we solve this, right? What is your community doing for resilience? Were the kinds of things they got to write on there. So come join us with all of those pieces. I'm going to tell you a little bit. I just want to share that we have a climate education action team. I mentioned my friends at Michigan Alliance for Environmental and Outdoor Educators. 2 years ago now, I went and gave one of these talks at their annual conference, and we were so inspired that we created a whole group to deal with this. And so I really invite you to come join me, join Mayo, come join this group. It is exclusively K through 12 folks, and it also includes many of our nature center folks and informal educators. And so we really do a lot of place-based learning. But based on all those surveys and where we knew things were at, our goals are to help organize that quality content. I think Elise is going to show a little bit of something called Subject to Climate a little bit later. That is a very, very cool resource that we are building out as part of this team. We're looking for ways to bridge that competence gap for Michigan to promote those. and really essentially support each other in taking this on in your classrooms. So please come be a part of that. We have a lot of fun. And I'm going to stop share. Well, I'll just stop for a second there before I move on to what would have been Erica's part of this. And maybe I'll just take a couple minutes for any questions or anything that might have come up in that space, thinking about public attitudes and why we should teach climate or what teachers and kids are feeling.
I have a question, Denise. I'm wondering about if I'm a classroom teacher, or if I have experience or time in a more formal setting with a group of students. Um, when you talk about doing an action-based reaction or something action-based to kind of help with this feeling of overwhelm, would it be good or would it be a good idea to have students do this kind of work with you, like doing some of this letter writing or doing some of these calls to local legislators? Because even if the action is right there to do, like for me, I get annoyed when I've got to call my mechanic. So I'm wondering if it might be something that you could do as a group or as a class.
Absolutely. We do absolutely encourage that. And indeed, right, when the voices of our youth are engaged, they are absolutely listened to. One of the kind of crying shames of the current, I was a former political science professor, is our youth have so much power in their voices, right? But they also don't think that that's true, and they don't use them as often. And so one of the best things we can do, Mara, is exactly that, to encourage this within your classroom or in your group. And I think I'm gonna give you some actions that we can take in just a little bit too.
Thank you.
Shall I keep marching on here? How we doing, everybody out there?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think we're good. If you do have questions now or later, feel free to pop them in the chat and I can pipe up at a good moment or during our next pause to ask those questions.
I do have a question. May I ask?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So as a former educator, now retired, and I still volunteer multiple times a week in the schools, I find that it's not that the teachers don't want to teach about climate change, but either it's not part of the curriculum or there's no time for it, or it's kind of a, sidebar type thing. So, I mean, I think it's more of an issue with, the um, getting it into the curriculum.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm sure it wildly differs from district to district, but a lot of the science teachers that I know say it's not a part of the curriculum. And it doesn't have to be science, it could be economics, it could be, I mean, there's so many things relate health and everything else, but it's just not part of the curriculum. How do we deal with that?
Absolutely. There are a couple of small pieces where it is in our current standards, but that's exactly why I went back to the slide about this committee. Goal number 3, adapt Michigan education policy to include it. That's exactly what we need and want to do. And you're absolutely right. I should have mentioned this is an interdisciplinary group. This should be in climate change affects every single aspect of our lives and livelihoods and our world. And that it's been our science teachers that has borne the brunt of all of this for so long is part of the mistake I think we might have made, right? Back to even my own, thinking about it from that science only view and not including humanities and writing and social, like how are we really thinking about this as humans? That's exactly it. So incredibly interdisciplinary, and that's exactly what we want to work on. How do we include this into the standards? And I'll point out Miss Bridget Booth is right here. She's an 8th grade teacher who has really helped lead this committee and is going to be the chair of this subject to climate that is helping us do exactly that. So you're right. It's writing it into those standards. There's a climate literacy bill that's been proposed a lot that we've always supported, right? Making sure those kinds of things can happen so that we see that actual support. Patty, did you want to add to that or were you? Yeah, go ahead. I see you over there.
Do. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Well, while you were going through this, and this kind of goes with what Cindy just said too, I think the statistics of like 39% of teachers saying that they are teaching it and 21% feeling very informed. My question was like, do you think that some teachers are teaching about climate change without actually knowing it's climate change related, or they don't use the words climate change. Um,
Yeah, I was trying to find my slide and then I screwed it all up. So don't worry, I'll get that back first. Yes, I think that that's probably true. You know, a lot of what we found, if we look back at those little stats, this one is what you're sort of talking about.
yeah,
They're teaching climate change, but only 21% of those are feeling very. So you're asking about the gap between 21 and 39? I often think about that question, or just overall. I think that,
yeah,
yeah, I think that there's a lot of that because we have primarily seen this in the science classes, that that's where folks are feeling very informed, right? Teaching about the models, teaching about the carbon cycle, those kinds of things. But where we often see the biggest competence gap is in more of our language arts or our social
right,
sciences, or even PE. I don't know what you even call it anymore, right? But gym should is a climate change course, and so I think folks are teaching about it in ways that they don't recognize yet, for sure, right? And I also think that there is a lot of folks who say, well, I'm just not really covering that because I don't feel like I know how to do that. And that's what we are here to help eradicate, right?
right. Yeah. And I think the term climate change itself
Yeah,
keeps people from doing it.
it does.
So,
It absolutely does. And, you know, we're the Michigan Climate Action Network, so I'm going to keep saying climate out loud and proud here, right? And it's fine to talk about renewable energy. It's fine to talk about carbon, right? Like, there's so many ways to think about all of the different perturbations of climate and the impacts and their solutions that I'm sure we can find. If language is the barrier, right, then that
right,
we don't care what you call it as long as we address it.
right.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm sorry for driving through the rest of these slides here, but I'm going to get back to right here and maybe just talk a little bit about why we come at this from a climate justice perspective and what that just sort of means, right? And so again, I'm sorry you have to continue to listen to me and the couple little examples that I want to draw out because of the focus on place-based learning is something called nature-based solutions. And hopefully we'll have a time to show you our little line 5 video and what's going on with that. So I'm sure this probably isn't big news to any of you. One of the best sites that I like to use is Carbon Tracker USA. This is also in a paper from a few years ago, right? But I think we always have to start at the global level for these pieces. And so the top graphic is who's been contributing to climate change, right? From a geopolitical perspective. And here, red is bad again, right? The highest emissions to the lowest emissions in blue. The United States, right, is responsible for more than a quarter of historical emissions. We are by far the largest source of emissions over time. When we flip that map and we say who's going to be most impacted by climate change, and we look at where the red is here, that really gets us into the heart of the definition of global climate justice. Those that have done the least to create this issue are going to be the most impacted by it, right? And that same concept at the global level carries on to the Michigan piece, to the states and to Michigan. And we're going to wrap up all of these links and things for you. You're going to get the presentation here, so you'll be able to like click on these. But the other thing that I want to do and get out to Allison and Mara in the next couple of days is a resource list with some of these pieces and the different citations that we use. But a great tool that you can explore in your classrooms is the Michigan Environmental Justice Screening Tool. And it works just like a map down here, right? You can put in all sorts of characteristics around access to air quality, forests, and food deserts, pipelines even, right? And map out and see where in Michigan are those same things happening. And it's very similar, right? We have very distressed, marginalized communities that are bearing most of the impacts of the rest of our activities. On the left is a good one to get us into our nature-based solutions, thinking about the forest cover in Michigan, right? There's a really big, wonderful push to make 30% of Michigan for access to forest by 2030. Well, guess what? We're already at 30%. But what's the problem with that map? It's all in the UP where we love to go and recreate, but where's my nearby nature for the Southwest and Southeast Michigan, right? So we need to be thinking about how those kinds of things affect. And there's just so much you can do with the EJ screening tool and looking through that to identify populations, to think up issues that your class might want to work on. Another thing I really like to bring into classroom settings in particular is to think about what do we really mean by privilege and power when we talk about justice. And sometimes I accompany this with a feelings wheel, right? Like how does that actually, can we name our feelings on that? But there's many ways to think about privilege, right? Is it where I live? Is it how I look? Is it my educational background? Is it my economic background? Is it my own physical appearance? And all of these pieces are ways that you could explore with your students to really get at that idea of justice and what we're talking about when we talk about marginalized folks. The other activity, maybe some of you have done this, it's a really common one in corporate settings as well as nonprofits to education, is to do an exercise with your students after doing the wheel, right? Where you kind of fall. The next exercise that is recommended is to do a cultural iceberg, right? And what is it that the world sees and they're making a decision about me on? Versus what are all the things underneath here that are my true core values or who I really am? And just doing that exercise for students themselves to understand what is seen and unseen and how we're all judged and judge is really, really powerful. And I invite you to utilize that resource. So climate justice, there's a lot going on in this thing, but the biggest piece that I recommend for folks to really understand, this is written by EJ communities from across the United States, and there's a publication called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse that walks through why many things that we think about are seen as climate solutions really aren't from the perspective of justice and what are. And I just put this graphic up here of some of the kind of common ways of approaches, right? Ecological consciousness is really where the justice movement is at. And so when we think about the indigenous approach, when we think about that place-based approach and natural solutions, that's what we're leading with, right? Versus our current system, which is really market-based, right? The resources, how do we extract? How do we get value? How do we make money out of those things? And a couple to just sort of think about, right? You can take any of these side by side, but in our current system, we're thinking about industrial fixes, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm focused on solar and wind, right? Those are technological fixes to climate change, though, right? And we can have that, but we got to make sure we also are including indigenous traditional knowledge and stewardship and how places actually work, right? Instead of the top-down approach, we focus on a very bottom up. Where are the voices, right? If you, I shouldn't talk about you if I don't talk to you, right? If you haven't heard that one, it's a really good rule for who should be at this table and who should actually be making those decisions. A reductionist, I can have, and I did this for years, right? We can have the water department, we have the air department, we have parks department. This is how we're organized, so segmented. Versus what we're going to do is look at cumulative impacts and a truly holistic view of that, right? This is where we are headed, right? We have to return, if we had it at all, an ecological consciousness. And that's a lot of what the justice movement is about. And it will help, I think, folks understand, this could be a series that we run all year. Why is carbon capture not something that we're super excited about, right? That's a very technological fix that doesn't work with the carbon cycle, right? So things like that, it really explains those pieces. And so I always like to draw attention to this resource. And as promised, I'll pull out just a little bit, the big solution that justice trains us to lean toward first is nature, right? It's an amazing thing. all of the things that nature does, yet never seems to be in a hurry or rushed like I am, right? Yet everything happens. And so when we talk about nature-based solutions, it really is living in community and in recognizing that our community includes nature. And so thinking about how that wetland works, how that natural system is already managing drought or flooding, or unfortunately the wildfires that we have all witnessed out in LA and California this past year, in really living in tune and thinking about how that system already responds and working within that, right? There are benefits to nature and people when we do this. And we could solve a lot of our issues, right? And so there is this big movement for 30% of nature-based solutions to make sure that we are really focusing on keeping those spaces ecologically functional. That will remove 5 gigatons and save us a bunch of money, right? When we do those things, we're trying to still decrease these greenhouse gases, and we can capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere naturally, right? And one of the biggest ways we do that is, of course, trees. But I have to tell you that just planting trees is not going to be enough. I'm so sorry to say that. But it is a most wonderful activity that you can monitor, that you can go do, because trees give us all sorts of co-benefits, right? What we worry about from a justice point of view, and that's what these points are, when we only plant trees, trees are not a substitute for also stopping fossil fuels, right? We still have to turn off the faucet. If we don't turn off the faucet, we're just exacerbating a problem and just can't keep up. And so one of the things to watch for in greenwashing is it's not a yes and in this situation, right? It has to be a shut off, and we're going to increase these pieces. Right, that's why carbon offset accounting and measuring these things just for their carbon sticks. Trees aren't just little carbon sticks either, right? They are part of a whole community themselves. And those are the kinds of things that we are really talking about when we think about nature-based solutions, and that I think would just be some of these documents and pieces are a perfect complement to what you're doing with place-based learning and thinking about how a very localized little wetland, watershed, park, whatever it is, how is it demonstrating the water carbon cycle? How is it already experiencing impacts from climate? And how is it already protecting us from those impacts? Those are the kinds of things that really seem to bring it home for folks. All right, we have 4 minutes. We're going to try this video. Hope you guys can hear music right now, and maybe you'll hear Erica talking in just a minute.
Line 5 is a 70-year-old dual pipeline running through Lake Michigan and Lake Huron in the Straits of Mackinac. The straits are essential fishing grounds for Anishinaabe tribes in Michigan, and they are reserved to the tribes in perpetuity in treaties with the U.S. The dual pipelines crossing the straits have been damaged by multiple anchor strikes, routinely lose required supports, and have been bent by the enormous currents in the straits. There have been 35 documented spills on Line 5, totaling over 1 million gallons since 1968. Line 5 carries nearly 23 million gallons of crude oil and natural gas liquids daily, with only 5 to 10% of the product carried being used in Michigan. It defies a shutdown order placed by Governor Gretchen Whitmer nearly 3 years ago. In 1991, Enbridge was responsible for the 1.7 million gallons of crude oil spilled in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Line 3 ruptured, gushing onto the frozen Prairie River, missing the Mississippi River by a mere 2 miles. In 2010, Enbridge spilled 1.2 million gallons of tar sands oil into the Kalamazoo River after claiming Line 6B pipeline was safe. These 2 spills are on record as the worst inland oil spills in U.S. history. Great Lakes supply drinking water to over 40 million people every year. It's home to hundreds of animal species and thousands of plant and insect species. It's home to hundreds of thousands of people and an uncountable amount of our summer memories. More importantly, the Great Lakes are home to over 20% of our world's fresh surface water. Fresh surface water is all forms of fresh water from lakes, rivers, ponds, and streams. That's 1/5 of the entire world. And that's why we as a state are responsible for preserving, protecting it. Join us in the fight to shut down Line 5 today.
At least you got to hear Erica's voice, right? And it's way better than all my boring words on this slide, which say the same things, right? And why is this a justice issue? Just right to think about who is benefiting from this massive fossil fuel companies. Where is the impact going to be in our straits, right? Very little of that is actually used in Michigan and is a huge impact to us. Again, there's a huge legal and policymaker background here that the video does a nice job of. You know, currently Enbridge is in violation of a governor's revocation of an easement. The attorney general is back in state court and trying to remove them as well. Our Michigan policymakers have already decided that the thing to do is to get rid of this thing because of its impacts to Michigan, yet it's still here. We're suing them. We were just in the Court of Appeals around that. There is a permit up at the Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to get another water permit, and there is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineer review. There are 3 bodies that still have a chance to stop this with us: the Michigan Public Service Commission, Eagle, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we got actions that I will share with all of you. What a wonderful thing you could do, hopefully, in your classes, to the Mara's comment earlier. You know, come organize. Let's share some more resources around Line 5 and its impacts and what's happening, and get them to help us write a letter or make a short petition to sign on to these things. And it's not quite ready yet, but I am going to be so excited. We are also just putting together a break a world record Line 5 action. So we are modeling it off of Guinness World of Records, right? It's very complicated to break a real world record, so we're just going to say that we unofficially break one. But we are getting together an action right now. And I think the record that we're going to want to break is folding the most amount of origami fish. It turns out 18,003 have been folded before. And we think we can do better than that. And I have teamed us up with our partners on this issue in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And I think it's going to be the perfect classroom exercise for everybody. So I think it's time for our break now. So I'm happy to stick around, but we also need a break so that you can get to Elise and we can stay on time. Thank you so much for listening to me. And sorry I had to be Erica and not do as great a job on that as she probably would have.
Oh, Denise, you did great. So don't even worry about that. But yes, like Denise said, we're going to take a break right now. We know you've been teaching and working all day, so please stand up and stretch, take a breather, and we will come back here at 5:30. So you've got just several minutes to do what you need to do, and we will be back here shortly. If you have any questions about Groundswell, I know I'm here and ready to answer any questions. So is Mara. If you have any extra questions for Denise, we still have a few more minutes before we jump back in. Good, about 2 more minutes. So if you aren't back at your seat yet, maybe start heading that way and we're about to get started.
Hey Denise, for those of us who are still on, or I think it might be Elise, we're getting a nice little peek at your email, just FYI.
Sorry about that. I'm sharing the wrong screen.
No worries. I've done it so many times.
I did that. We were doing so good. Thanks for letting me know.
You're welcome. There we go. Now we have
Me
time
totally
adjusted.
answering, and I'm
It
not
happens.
multitasking that bad.
No, I just thought, I don't think it's intentional, so I let her know.
It is not. I was trying to get all ready for Elise, and I will drive for you, Elise. So just tell me when to hit the next one.
All right. Are we getting started? Are we going to go ahead and?
Yeah, I think we are ready to get going. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Elise.
Thank you. So just to preface a little bit about myself, I started off much later. I came a little bit later to this game of studying climate change. I was already a faculty member, and I found I wanted to do something, I think, like many of our students. And so I took a climate change policy and management course. I met Denise and kind of been going from there, but I definitely teach climate change now. And I've been thinking very intentionally about how do we teach climate change, not just in science classes, but everywhere? And how can we not just teach from our own discipline's perspective, but from multiple discipline perspectives in a way that they overlap rather than always assuming they're separate entities, right? So that's been a lot of what I do. So I'll just talk a little bit about that, but then I want to speak a little bit to what I think has gotten a lot of, I don't know, I want to say buy-in from the folks that I teach at Albion College, and that's been climate storytelling and a real interest in setting up workshops and doing that. And I think that can work at any age. And I think kids love stories, and I think stories are one of the great places. So Denise has already talked about humanities and the arts, and I think this is absolutely tied into that. And then, because I know every time we go to a workshop, we want something we can take away and do something with, right? I know I've been to many workshops, so I always like, so what can I put into action? So I will show you one example lesson. Now, I'm not sure which, I think there are multiple age grade levels that I have resources for. So if this doesn't speak to your grade level, I have other things in my resources section, but I wanted to show you a little bit on something I've used that's very similar to this, even in college classes, that I think is really great. So I'll share that with you, and then I'll just cover a little bit about what resources you can check out as you go and check out this a little bit in more detail after today. All right, so go ahead and forward. Thank you. So climate change pedagogy, it's a lot of the things Denise has already mentioned, and I think many of you are very well kind of steeped in. It's that the importance of being tied to place. And I think empathy, especially with respect to climate justice, it really requires us to think about how our own places and spaces are affected by what's happening. I can tell you on a sort of personal note, my own daughter was quite sad last year when we didn't really get much snow. She even participated in a snowman protest, right? And so I think it's absolutely possible for kids to understand on some level and to see loss, and they need to feel like they can do something, right? And I definitely feel like when you build that empathy and then you give them action, it's really powerful. And I would add to that, as I said, telling climate stories, giving them a chance to talk about their own experience as they've been processing these feelings, right? So anything you can do along those lines is fantastic. And I'm sure you're all great educators, and the tools I give you, obviously you don't need to just take them and try and plop them right into your classroom. You all have great creative energy, but I definitely feel like there needs to be this piece within any discussion of climate. And also this sense that not only, we're all tied to this planet, and we care about other people on this planet too. So building that empathy with other people who are most vulnerable and least responsible is really important in the lessons we teach too. But I did want to note, and I'm not sure it covers climate equity a little bit, but there's a new climate literacy guide that I still wanted to mention, and I provide a link to there. I think it could do more in terms of its discussion of equity, but it's a step up from the last guide in 2009 that just talked about climate science and a little bit of adaptation. So I was really glad to see that come out, and I think it could be a good tool for finding ways to integrate discussions of climate science, climate justice, and climate adaptation. And again, you can make this part of a literature class, and you don't have to be a climate science expert to really talk about some basic things and then how they make you feel, right? And then the one other thing I want to mention that's very interdisciplinary about climate change and teaching climate change is that it's very much a systemic issue with multiple systems being affected, economic systems, but also social systems, obviously ecological ones. And we have to be able to think about how all of those tie together. And especially as students, right, advance through their learning, it's important to help them see how these different parts of society work together. And so obviously any kind of action learning that shows government working and how that's in some way taking action to protect or conserve or some other piece, I think is really powerful. So they can see that they can make a difference and that it's multiple systems working together. There are other skill sets that are very highlighted in a lot of people who've written on sustainable education. And those competencies include being better at handling interpersonal communication. So I think we're really good at teaching knowledge, but also there are sort of what they call soft skills that I think are really critical for kids as they start to think about their own careers. It's important to be able to know how to talk to people in their profession and other interest groups or stakeholders. And these are the kinds of things that they need to, have a sense of confidence in. So building those skills in terms of interpersonal communication and working with different groups, however, right, those activities come out can be really great. And then lastly, and this is the cultural anthropologist in me coming out, but having a sense of norms and values. What are the cultural values of the people that you're interacting with, right? What perspective do they bring and come with when you're trying to affect positive change, right? So all of these ethical and sort of values-based things are really important in any kind of interdisciplinary across the disciplines kind of work. And the more the different disciplines can interact is, I think, all the better to help children see that these are connected, right? Yeah, go ahead. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but this is a link to the Climate Stories project. And I just copied in a few different statements or questions of things you can ask young people to reflect upon. And I think that everyone has some kind of special connection, hopefully, to the place they grew up in. And so have them think about what that is, right? And you don't have to use the word threaten, but whatever words seem best and most appropriate for the audience you're working with, have them think about what are they concerned about and how has it been affecting them, and then work through those emotional feelings about it, and then tell those stories, because then when they tell those stories, right, this is something Denise mentioned, when we feel like we're part of a collective, it really is empowering, and it can be empowering for them too. So you can probably hear my children squealing through the vent, but I'm sorry if that's the case. But anyway, that's another thing I would recommend trying, because this is something that can be tried in a science classroom. I don't think it just has to be a literature classroom, a social studies classroom. Have them talk about this and in other classrooms, right? So anyway, that's another way to increase this sense of empathy and place-based learning that I think we all know is really important. Go to the next slide. So here's my example lesson. I have a link, and I'll ask Denise to click on it in a minute. But one thing I wanted to just kind of bring out is it does a lot of these things. It encourages empathy. It helps. This is actually based in the image you can see there. It's an EPA EJ screen in-class exercise for middle school students. And it does a nice job of intersecting these concepts of health in places where people are having higher rates of asthma, especially, and exposure to air pollution and particulates, and more difficulties in, more issues with COVID because of those lung problems, right? So it shows that intersection between health and maps, and then also government and policies, the history. I think this might have been briefly brought up of redlining, where neighborhoods, right, were, drawn in such a way that those that were redlined received the lowest ratings in terms of the housing market and so on, and that affected where money went. And now that's where a lot of the worst polluters are, right? So the least responsible and the most vulnerable are also the most affected. So again, we can cement that message in this exercise, which is a really good case study. And I like to add It also offers, the next to last bullet point there, an opportunity for students to go and write to a letter. Right? I think we talked about that earlier, but write a letter to a local government official or state government official, post something on social media, and commit to having conversations with fellow people. And it can be so scary for a kid, but it can also be really meaningful, right, when they get that response back. And I think that that's important too. So if Denise, if you want to click on the link, it says link there, to subject to climate. Oh, did it not? Should be, yeah, it should just, it may not let you do that in presentation mode. I'm not sure. But it is on the Subject to Climate website. So you can certainly find, if you look up this title, should be able to find it there.
Do you have the link in another way, or here I'll just should be able
I
to
think you can. Yeah, there it goes.
Yeah, there's a different way we gotta embed them in here. We're really missing Erica today.
Sorry about that. But yeah, so one thing I just wanted to point out, it gives you a synopsis, it tells you the different subjects that are engaged, and I would argue even more than it lists there. I think talking about health is also there. And if you think about health science, obviously, connections there. But then if you scroll down, what I really love is they also include a lovely multi-tab sort of guide. I don't know how many of you have checked out Subject to Climate, but you get the lesson plan preview, which is all templated nicely and kind of broken down into what standards it serves and all those other things. And then you can go on to these other tabs, and there's supporting materials, there's slideshows, slides you can use, teaching tips I particularly love, because this can be a place where people feel some hesitancy. It's like, I don't know if I can do this in my classroom. I'm a little worried, right? But then you look at this and they offer some ideas of how you can talk about this, ways you can work with your students and understand it and acknowledge the different perspectives of your students and experiences with this. So I think there are lots of important supports that these Subject to Climate lessons really provide. That's just super valuable. And I encourage you to dig deeper, but there's all sorts of stuff on air quality, all the way starting at K2, right, up to this level, middle school and high school. So there's something there for all age groups, and I think it's just fantastic. So let's go ahead and go back, and I'll just quickly share with you the resources that are available. And there are many more than what I share here. So of course, dig a little more. It's fun to explore these websites. If Denise, you want to click to the next couple of slides. So this is just a general resources and by no means even close to as many things as we have. But for those interested in doing EJ screen activities, I really also recommend the Mapping Inequality site, which does a good job of helping to set a foundation on how that works. And you can actually see the maps and how that overlaps with the modern day neighborhoods. And I think it's a good comparative exercise. So I encourage you, if you're interested in that, to check that out. It also has teaching resources too on that website. And there's great climate education pages, the Subject to Climate. And I know I thought I had the link, but I didn't, but I'm sure we could find a link to the soon to be launched, if not already launched, Subject to Climate Michigan page. So that'll be awesome to see as well. But I list a couple other things there, the literacy guide, and of course, MEECS, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, that's got some great curricular resources that are Michigan focused, and should definitely look at that. And Mayo, of course, which was mentioned. And a couple more pages, just real quick. So they're grade level resources, and I tried to break it down by grades, K2, and there's some other groupings, but 3 to 5, I know is another kind of common grouping. And there's all sorts of stuff for air quality, heat island effect. And I think these are all great, not only to talk about climate justice, but also health and responsibility and mitigation and history, right? It pulls in all of these different pieces together. And I think these are great ways to show an interdisciplinary way of talking about climate change in the classroom and climate justice. So there's another slide, but anyway, thank you all, and I look forward to more conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elise. Before we break into our breakout rooms, does anybody just have any follow-up questions for Elise? Just quick cues before we jump in. And please remember, we also have plenty of time set aside at the end. But if you have any burning questions before you get into the breakout rooms, please ask now.
I see one in the chat, and I just want to thank you, Elise. Elise has been with MICAN as our education advisor for just over a year and has done an incredible job. You can see why we bring her in to do the brass tacks piece. You're going to get the slides, and we're going to put together a resource document for you. I think the one thing that I just wanted to say on the subject to climate is, remember, that was an outgrowth of our climate education action team. So that really was because teachers and a couple organizations got together and started putting limited funds together and got them to Michigan, right? And if you want to be involved in that, there's an advisory group. There's all sorts of meetings you can go to make sure that that resource is well used. I think there's a question in here about dealing with administrations that
And Denise, you probably can answer this a little bit or draw on your own experience in working with Bridget on this piece. So I would turn that expertise over to you.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, are we sure they're against it? Because remember my slide about all these administrators actually think you're already teaching climate and they want you to do it. And so I think that we can start some of those conversations with our administrators, and administrators aren't a monolith either, right? And so my first advice is to always go have that conversation and don't do it alone. Remember that you've got all your support out there and other teachers. But if there really is opposition, and sometimes, right, to the next level when there are resources involved or we're really talking about changing standards, of course, right? I don't even call it opposition. Those are good questions. And what we've done at several schools now, and Hazlitt Middle School is probably the most famous right now with our folks from Mayo, is organize students to then go present at their boards and talk to them about why this is important, what they are doing, how they can become a green school and beyond, and do that. And that has really, it takes a little longer, but it generally is the way forward to really get your district administrators to listen. So happy, that's what the role that we play in those groups is, to organize that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for asking that question. And that was a great momentum to bring into our breakout rooms. So in a moment, you will be placed into a room with either Denise, Elise, or Mara and myself, if I put myself in the correct room. And we will be chatting as small groups until about 6:15. So please use this time as your group feels is the best for you. Are you going to have a discussion together? Maybe you'll look at the EJ screening tool as a group or individually. I know they shared some really awesome resources, but finding the time to dig through those resources as a teacher can be tough. So maybe it'll take a few minutes to do that during this time as well. So you'll be in those rooms till about 6:15, and then we will close out with a discussion. So here you go. I did it.
Victory!
Victory.
So we have 2 breakout rooms then?
We have 3.
3.
Mm-hmm. With a couple people dropping out early. This was like perfect numbers. I think we have almost 5 people in each one. So
Awesome.
well, team, you're welcome to keep your cameras off if you would like, but if you want to turn them on, feel free. And I'm excited to just chat with you all about what we've discussed so far as a group, and maybe we can have our own little Q&A. If you want to ask any Groundswell specific questions, anything like that. Mara, anything you want to start off with, or do you think we should just go around and introduce ourselves maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. We have been at every professional learning opportunity, so you might know myself and Allison already, but my name is Mara Spears. I'm the project specialist at Groundswell Stewardship Initiative.
And I'm Allison Palmbalil, and I'm the place-based education specialist at Groundswell. So yes, I have been at all the PLOs because that's my job.
And I think we have names in the room who I'm not quite familiar with. So I'm just going to go in a circle. Tracy, do you have a second to introduce yourself?
Yes, I work at East Kentwood at the freshman campus. So I'm working with Rob Barrett and I'm rather new to Groundswell. So I appreciate this virtual meeting because it's allowed me to attend between work and family balance. So I'm just happy to be here and sort of more absorb information tonight.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks for being here. Iris, are you on the call still and want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Iris Gibson, and I am a native of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I do a lot of work in my community from early childhood in Grand Rapids public school districts, and also I'm a parent leader at the National Heritage Academy, so also in the charter schools. Um, and I'm also a community ambassador with the Community Collaboration on Climate Change. So I'm definitely happy to be here soaking up this information. It's been wonderful so far, so thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Iris. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're so involved. That's so inspiring also. I can't wait to hear more about that. I think it's pronounced Kaylee. Kaylee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I am the John Paul Zoo educator. I teach conservation and pollinators, and I go around Grand Rapids Public Schools and teach them all about that. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to learn about that.
And there goes the dog. Don't worry, I've got a cat. I get it. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Sorry. We've got 3 dogs that are just wound up today.
No problem. No problem. They're welcome on the call also.
Oh my gosh, they have to be known.
Well,
So
great. Thank you so much, Kaylee. Thanks for being
of
here.
course.
And last but certainly not least, Emma, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh no, we can't hear you. Well, I'll speak for you.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go.
Ooh, sorry. My mic must have not been all the way plugged in. Um, I'm Emma Van Eerden, and I'm the Student Office Assistant for Groundswell in the Center for Educational Partnerships.
Beautiful. Thank you. So with this group, MICAN did send us some prompts for Mara and I to help kind of kick off this conversation. But before maybe we jump to those, does anybody have anything just organically that has resonated with you during the content so far? Any questions or things that are really exciting to you? Things that are really nerve-wracking for you? Just kind of open the floor if anybody wants to kind of kick off any sort of conversation.
I know I'm not technically a participant, but I'm always curious, one, if teachers or our community members have seen that Yale citizen survey before on climate change perspectives. And if you feel like it rings true with you, if you feel like it's something that does actually demonstrate that we are not the only folks who teach or who work to educate about climate change or believe in it, despite the fact that we might be hearing messaging that says otherwise.
I actually have not ever seen or heard of that Yale survey before. I'm actually gonna check it out and kind of research it, review it. and see how it does apply to my community. Because here in Grand Rapids, we were doing a climate survey in our communities, and just the responses that we got, it was just like, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't really resonating the people who are going to be impacted the most by climate change. And so I'm kind of curious if it's the same thing with the Yale reports. Like, are people who are really impacted by this taking this survey, or is it the usual people who kind of already do this work and know, what's going on with climate change? So I'm interested to find out that information.
I know, right? It's like you hear it and you kind of feel good about it because it means we're not alone, but also it just doesn't feel necessarily like that is the reality that we see day to day.
What I thought was interesting about the Yale survey is the difference between people that were very concerned and worried, but then the people who take action. And I feel like often I'm in that group of someone who is very concerned and worried and talks about it with their students, but yet doesn't do that step of action to do something about it. And like Iris said, I believe, like, just really curious to hear other people like talk about it and see where they would rate themselves on the scale, and how we can take our concern and put that into action and to do something about it, instead of just learning about climate change and thinking about it and worrying it, but to actually do something positive in our community.
Absolutely. And that's something, I mean, that we talk a lot about at Groundswell, obviously, is um, giving students a chance to see like that you can make a very big difference in your community. And that can in turn help kind of alleviate some anxiety and some stress. Obviously, you can't cure all of climate change, but just kind of affirming to your students that small steps together really do create bigger steps. And just not feeling so hopeless. I think seeing yourself and your classmates take action and just be equally nervous, but turning that nerves into empowerment can be like a really wonderful bonding experience. Um, so I can go on and on about that, but I'll stop there. Well, maybe I'll jump to our prompts here and see if those can kind of help spur some convo, unless anybody else has anything else they want to throw into the chat right now. But our first prompt is share something we covered today that you would like to implement, already have done, or have seen implemented with success.
I'll volunteer Tracy because I know her team is doing some interesting work at East Kentwood.
So we start our year and we do very much standards-based learning, and we start our first unit looking at climate change and looking at the UN. I believe there's 17 resolutions that are impacting society, and climate change is one of them. So that's what we start by looking at data. And it's really we teach freshman science, so looking at data is really important to us to use as evidence as we move forward throughout the year. And so seeing the data about what countries are causing climate change versus those that are most affected, I think really gets to the humanitarian effort. And as science teachers, it's a constant struggle for a lot of students of why is this valuable? Why is this important? Why do we care? And putting this in perspective of these people or a very diverse school district of where are people going to be hurting the most, and thinking about the people and the places that are impacted, and how can we use data to make arguments about where we should be supporting, what changes should we be making to help individuals, communities, that for our school district, we are so globalized that I guarantee I have students from an area that could be hit or is being hit with climate change trends.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's honestly such a great way to model and encourage empathy among students because you're right. It's that real world connection that can really open their eyes to these issues that sometimes maybe feel almost like invisible at times. I mean, granted, in the past, however many years, climate change has become a lot more visible, but it can feel a little bit up in the air. So putting a map and seeing like these are the places that are being hit the most, and these are the places that are, causing the most climate change, negative things, it can really help put into perspective. And again, really encourage that empathy piece and hopefully spurring some action among students.
Miss Tracy, thank you so much. Because I actually have a niece that goes to East Kentwood. So one niece there and one that graduated last year. And their parents absolutely drive me crazy because they are uninterested in learning about what climate change is and how it affects us. So it makes me feel so good to know that, the school is already talking about that and implementing it. So I don't have to keep wanting to shake the mess out of my family because they're not listening. So thank you so much.
Oh, I love that connection.
Of course, Iris. Sometimes I think they don't listen to me either. So we're all in the same boat, right?
But maybe if they're hearing it at home and from teachers and from partners like the Zoo and Groundswell, maybe they'll be like, oh, I should probably start listening. All these adults keep saying this. So it's a group effort. Anybody else? Things that we've covered so far that you've seen implemented before that you've seen really be successful, maybe things that weren't successful, anything with student engagement or something that you're really interested in trying to implement at your school or organization.
Yep, so I'm going to go ahead with that one because I am a poet. And so I do a lot with youth and creating echo poetry. I call it justice all around because when we talk about climate justice, there's social justice, housing justice, just all the justices. And so I threw an event where the youth, they created a echo style poetry and they performed it at a park. It was food, it was it was just this big old event. It was wonderful. And I also was able to give them $100 gift card for performing. They got $100 gift card. They also got like a journal, like colored pencils and pens. And I was so amazed how as soon as they got their journals and colored pencils and pens and everything in their hand, they immediately start writing. And some of them took their book up there with them and recited their poem right there. So, doing things with the arts, and that also helps the kids, I feel, deal with the emotions as well and process them. So that's an exciting thing. I love using the arts to help kids out with climate change education.
Oh, that is so awesome. I would love to hear more about that. And I feel like Mara and I, both of our brains are turning up. We're going to reach out to you after this to hear more about your work. But that also touches on something that Denise had said earlier was so much of climate change content has fallen upon science teachers. And it obviously touches every single person and therefore can be introduced into any subject. And involving the arts and humanities, like what an amazing way to tie empathy and expression with a huge issue that is affecting everybody around the world. So I love your tie-in of poetry. I think that is really, really, really cool.
I have an example of something similar that made a pretty big lasting impact on me. So in middle school, my environmental science teacher got us interested in the effects of plastic pollution through like straw usage on turtles. Um, so through this, we were able to, obviously this is before I knew the elements of place-based education, but we chose an issue, then we researched that issue, and we came up with an action project, which was a campaign called Tip It for Turtles. And that really played on the empathy, for turtles, because we were seeing pictures of turtles with plastic straws stuck in their nose. Um, so that actually inspired, we like ran this campaign through school, and we were able to convince our administration to purchase those water fountains that have the refill stations on top of them. And this is back when those were brand new, so this is like kind of revolutionary. And yeah, it was like the first time I remember seeing an example of like following a project through like that, and it was very impactful.
Oh, that is so cool. Thank you for sharing that, Emma. And like, what an awesome example of seeing how a group of people come together, students, even if you're not an adult, you can, create change. And like how you just said, how good that felt of like, oh, I did that. I created a positive change. I'm going to do that again. And then hopefully they just keep doing it. So that's awesome. And now you work for Groundswell. So clearly, clearly it worked. Anybody else want to share anything that they're excited to implement or seen something that didn't work with classes or at an organization or anything like that? Or I can jump to our next prompt because we only have a couple more minutes left as a group. That went really fast. All right, I'll read the next prompt. Okay, what barriers are we facing and why haven't we tackled climate change content before? What can we do as a community today to help address those barriers so that potentially teaching climate change in the classroom isn't so daunting or those barriers hopefully are minimized or don't exist at all? And I can start with this one. I think something that Denise said earlier was, so many teachers want to teach climate change and admin is supportive of it, but that huge piece of like the confidence of teaching about it and knowing what to say, I think that can be really tough. Granted, I'm not a classroom teacher and I never have been. So I've never necessarily like faced this myself. But I know that if someone said, okay, time to teach climate change, I know I would be nervous on a couple different levels from just knowing how to present it to any given grade level, and where I'm getting that information. And so I'm so glad that Elise has put together that awesome list of all those resources. But also, I think the human side of me would be really anxious about it because I think the more you learn about it, the scarier it can feel. So I think that would be a challenge for me is like taking care of my own emotions while teaching it. And my hope would be, knock on wood, hopefully, that seeing all these students also being anxious about it together, we can be as a class and just be like, look, I'm an adult and I'm a little bit worried about it too. What are we going to do about it? And so kind of taking like our group collective anxiety and doing something action oriented, like calling government leaders, to doing things outside, to whatever it may be we decide as a class. So we can kind of like collectively be there for each other in harder moments, but also collectively have a win of creating a good change. So that's the barrier I see. My own emotions. Huh. What about anybody else?
Allison, I think I resonate with that like a lot. I'm only with my students for an hour a month. I see 550 different students across the district, and I see each class once a month. So knowing like how much I can talk about with them, and then I have to say goodbye and leave them with their teacher who also might not be as comfortable or know how to talk about it. So finding that, but I think that list of resources is going to be very helpful to even share with teachers so then they know even if I do talk about it where they can go with it. So I am very
Totally.
excited.
Yeah, and hopefully kind of like keep that conversation going and kind of also like changing our own mental narratives at times of like it doesn't have to be scary. Like, yeah, it's a big thing. But also seeing that graph of like most of the world or the US at least is like we know about this and we are trying to make a difference. So I think even that like taking something difficult but then also showing that like people are turning their whole life's work into this. And again, yeah, like what you said is keeping that conversation going amongst teachers. But yeah, what a barrier. You only see them once a month. That would be hard to be like, okay, here's this thing. Now think about it for a month and I'll see you next month. I can see how that would definitely be tough.
Yeah.
I wonder tied to that too, if like access to resources that help you teach about it or help you learn about it.
That's exactly what I was getting ready to speak on, like, and the funding part of it. They never have the funding for the resources, so it's kind of overwhelming to have to find those resources at no cost, or sometimes I pay for things out of my own pocket just to make sure that we have what we need. So that's a big barrier, that funding. They don't want to come up off that money.
Yeah, for sure. That's a very, very consistent barrier, I'd say, probably across any teacher who is trying to teach this, for sure. I know another barrier I've heard teachers talk about, and I don't particularly remember which district it was, so I won't necessarily name drop, but I know some districts, unfortunately, like they're not even allowed to say the words climate change just based on where they are, which that can be very tough. So I know I've talked to a couple of people at the ISD saying, how do you teach it without saying it? But it's very important that students need to know it. Um, and again, I know that from what Denise said, that is the lesser side. Most admin, are very supportive of it, but that would be a huge struggle of, hearing one thing from admin, but knowing in your heart that that's not what you want to follow. So maybe having to be a little bit rebellious, but also wanting to keep your job. So that would be a tough too. Well, we have about 2 more minutes. So to end, let's end on something positive. Um, maybe if there's something really really impactful from today or just even anything you learned about climate change and using it in the classroom, something that you're really excited to carry through in your role wherever you're at, to help create good change. I have to turn on my timer, so hopefully if I click close all rooms, not everybody will leave all at once.
Take a minute. I'm excited for the launch of the Subject to Climate resource. That sounds super exciting. And I've been privy to some of the behind the scenes. And so just seeing what is going to be out there for teachers in our area is super exciting. So I'm looking forward to that.
I know I'm really looking forward to our student project showcase at the end of the year in May, which I can include that information in my follow-up email to all of you. But it's a great way to see hundreds of students just so excited about learning and taking care of the environment. So not necessarily climate change specific, but just seeing so many kids fired up, and just like empathy on 1,000. It was so inspiring, and it's like it gets you through the next year. So with that, we have about a couple more seconds. So thanks all for sharing your thoughts and your feelings, and I'll see you in the big room. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I know those jumps between rooms can feel a little bit abrupt, but
Just trying to thank my group.
well, with that, we have some time for a discussion and some Q&A. It's awesome to see so many faces. So before I turn it over to the crew to start that discussion, Denise or Elise, do you want to have any follow-up with your group? I know, again, sorry about the abrupt cutoff, but if you wanted to say thank you or finish any last thoughts. Feeling good?
I finished. I think we finished. We're good.
Okay, great. So with that, I am just gonna open it up to anyone here. If you have a question for MICAN or Groundswell or anything about the content that we went over today, there was so much good, juicy stuff. Doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It can just be a thought, and then we can have a dialogue about it all together. Anybody want to kick us off? And a reminder that if you'd prefer to share in the chat, you can share in the chat, and Mara will read for you.
Okay, I'll go. Too much silence there.
Thank you.
Time is money. And a couple of us brought up, Liz, myself, and really kind of everybody. I guess looking to Denise or any of you as far as connections to Indigenous individuals who we could meet with. In my case, I have a company that I have been doing about a 10 to 15 minute interview with for my website, and interviewing on a variety of subjects. And this is one that actually multiple times I intend to do is more, in my case, directly related to water and indigenous perspective to that. I know the Alliance for the Great Lakes had a guest speaker, it's like, what, about 9 months ago, something like that. And but seeking to do that here within Michigan, and more pointed to some of the regions, because with the three fires, if you will, get multiple perspectives. So looking for connections.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. We are connected. There is a water protectors network for Michigan that is indigenous based, right? That's a matriarchal piece that is led by women led, and women teach their daughters. And most of the tribes here are water centric focus. And so happy to connect you with some of the water protectors around the state that we work with. They're stronger in Lansing and up in the UP and some other areas, but we can absolutely get you on, get some connections there. The other piece that I would say is we work often with the Anishinaabe Caucus, and so not a political party, but is out there, that also organizes Indigenous folks and tries to make sure voices are heard at the legislative level. And they're just also really just a wealth of resources and contacts for me, and which extends to all of you now to find the right messenger for the right message, if you really want to tell those stories or make those things happen in your classroom. Happy to do that. And you can share my email. It might take me a day or two. It gets a little ridiculous every once in a while, but I will eventually get back to you with names.
Thank you.
I think that was all the question. We got it. It's getting late for me too. Even I'm starting to lose it, people. I hope you're doing all right out there.
Denise, I have a question for you, or also Elise too. Something we talked about in our group was actually, it was more so something I brought up, but I feel like it's maybe a collective experience, is when thinking about climate change content and students, granted, I'm not a classroom educator, or I've never been, but I imagine if I were going to teach climate change, that my own anxieties and fear around the subject could not necessarily like impair my teaching around it, but certainly it's tough. It's a tough thing to be talking about, and it's holding a lot of emotions, right? But I did mention maybe that collective anxiety within the classroom, and seeing a teacher be like, hey, like this is scary and that's kind of okay. What can we do together to create change? And kind of have a like bonding experience. This isn't necessarily a question, but more of a point to, I guess, talking about how you can connect with students over something that is, fairly difficult to talk about, but also remembering to show the joy of nature in the meantime, and that it's not all doom and gloom. It's hard, but we're not at the end of our rope yet.
That's right. I think you're spot on, right? And our group, I bet every group talked about that a little bit, right? It's always about showing, I mean, the courage to teach, right? I mean, that whole part of the philosophy is I see it in every single one of you sharing, hey, I'm dealing with this, and this is what's, how it can make folks feel. I think really using the feelings wheel and some of those privilege wheels can sort that stuff out. It gives you a way to really talk about those things. And the thing our group really talked about, what you just mentioned, Allison, is hey, there's also all these good people that are doing all these things, right? And so part of our approach, right, is to take there's a solutions oriented positive thing here. You just don't hear about it very often because that doesn't get clicks and sell media, and it's not as exciting as doom and gloom. And doom and gloom has done us a real disservice, right? For me, my moment was the reading the difference between the 1.5 and 2 degree study. So in 2018, we asked from the United Nations level, right? Our small island states were arguing, hey, 2 degrees isn't going to cut it for us. Can we commission a study for the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees so we all know what we're really talking about here? And I, like almost every other scientist and policymaker in the world, was absolutely blown away by the difference that every single little teeny fraction of a degree makes, right? And so when you get caught up in the climate and doom piece of it, I always remember that. Like if we go past 2, there's still so much we are saving by not going past 2.1, by not going past 2.5. And just I think that's just a mind shift that takes a different approach. But Elise actually talks to young people a lot younger than high school is about where I end. So she probably has more to say about the littles.
And oh, well, I mean, I have littles, but yeah. I would also say in the classroom, what I do is kind of a Good News Friday. I like the Good News Friday because I believe there's great stuff being done, and we need to hear about what's happening. We need to know about the seriousness of the problem, and I do talk about that. But then I also say, here's where action is happening, right? These are things you can be a part of if you're feeling kind of like, what do I do if because we can't allow our feeling of being able to do something rely entirely on who's in political office, because that's not that's not something right beyond a certain point we have control over. But there are things we do have control over, and those are the things we need to be focusing on. So I try to redirect them there, but I had a day where I just went around and said, what are the things that you're most worried about, and what are the things that give you hope? And I had each student just go around and say that. And it's good to just take the pulse, right, and kind of see where people are at.
Yeah, that's a great way to check in and to see where they're at. So you can be addressing the things that they are concerned about and celebrating collectively the things that are great. So yeah, that's a really great way to, like you said, take the temperature. Pun intended, kind of. Any other questions? We can probably have a couple more before I send us off for the evening.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for sharing all this information. And it's just so important that we're having this conversation together and with our students. And, as much as you can make available for younger students, I think is super important. It's, as we all know, it's not like a middle school, high school issue. But how to do that appropriately, and just great ideas this evening. Thank you.
Of course, Michelle, thank you for saying that. Absolutely.
Glad to hear it. It is the littles, as I refer to, that we probably have there's just a void of resources there, of understanding for our youngest, right? What do we really do there? And so we hear that, and lots of good folks are working on that piece.
All right, any final thoughts before I dismiss us all? If you do have any other follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to email me, and I can certainly connect you to the MICAN team. A couple of things I am going to pop in the chat for us. A link to the sketch form. If you are looking to get some credit for today, you can do that. On February 27th, we are having a happy hour for the Groundswell Network. So that is for community partners, for educators, and there's no necessarily like learning content going on. It's purely just to connect, to get together, socialize, have a drink on Groundswell. That is going to be at the Uccello's location in Standale. So we hope to see you there. Pre-registration is really helpful just so we know numbers, but feel free to share that with your colleagues. We'd love to see you there. And then lastly, our March PLO is going to be on March 19th. And as of today, we confirmed that it's going to be at the Founders Tap Room downtown. So a really fun, festive way to end our calendar year, or academic year, I mean, of PLOs. So I put that link there. Please sign up for that. And again, you can share that with any colleagues you'd like. But again, just thank you so much, everybody, for coming today and talking about this topic. The March PLO is going to be all about eco-anxiety and navigating tough emotions when it comes to climate change. So a really nice follow-up to our conversations today. So that one is going to be in person, like I said, at Founders. So we really hope we can see you there just to continue this really important conversation and celebrating the wins and sharing resources about how to be really solution-oriented. So huge thank you to Denise and Elise and Erica from MICAN for putting together this awesome presentation. For all of you folks here, I'll be emailing out all those links there that I just sent again tomorrow. And then MICAN is going to put together a really great catalog of resources. So I will send that in a few days. So just thank you all again, and we'll hopefully see you at one of our next events.
Thanks so much for hosting us. You all were a real pleasure to work with. We'll come back and we'll go have a drink on you in a month.
Perfect. We'll see you then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye.